Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Tiffany Dufu today, author of Drop the Ball. And another one of her many titles is My Dear, Dear Friend. I am thrilled to be welcoming Tiffany to Google today. Tiffany has dedicated her life to advancing women and girls. Named as one of 19 women who are leading the way in the Huffington Post amongst luminaries such as Hillary Clinton and Diane Sawyer, Tiffany's life's work is advancing women and girls. Her mission is to inspire women and girls to recognize they are the most powerful change agents in their own journey. Currently Chief Leadership Officer to Levo League and launch team member to Lean In, Tiffany is a catalyst at large in the world of women's leadership. And today she is here to talk to us about her latest book, Drop the Ball. We thought we'd start with a short reading of her book so that she can share some of the great wisdom that she's sharing with the world now. Tiffany?
Thank you. I used to be the queen of domesticity, a good housekeeping cover model in the making. I was also an ambitious professional. These two identities had always been on a collision course, but I was oblivious to that fact until after the crash. 8 years into my marriage and 6 months after giving birth to my first child, I started a new job fully expecting to be the powerhouse, perfect working wife and mother who had it all and did it all. I was joyfully wedded to my college sweetheart. We had a beautiful baby boy and we were committed to changing the world together. I knew that juggling the demands of a growing family, reaching the highest levels in my career, and supporting my husband as he climbed his own professional ladder wouldn't always be easy, but we were ready. Many women find it difficult to leave their infants on that first day back from maternity leave, but I was not one of them. I loved my work. I have always been a passionate advocate for the empowerment and advancement of women and girls, and I had been offered my dream job directing the fundraising efforts of the National Women's Leadership Organization. I would be doing work I cared about while learning from a pioneer in the women's movement, Marie Wilson, co-creator of Take Our Daughters to Work Day and former president of the Ms. Foundation for Women. On top of all that, the salary was enough to allow me the peace of mind that comes with leaving a child in the hands of a skilled and loving caregiver, a privilege too many working mothers cannot afford. And I had negotiated for a private room where I could pump breast milk. My maternity leave came to an end, and I joyfully prepared to go to work. I had grown up being told I could do anything I put my mind to. And as I got dressed that first morning back, I couldn't imagine I'd have to compromise on anything: career, marriage, raising a family, keeping our home life running smoothly while advancing the cause of women and girls. I left my apartment confident I would be successful doing it all. That illusion lasted 6 hours. My first day back at work was a whirlwind. I was so consumed with getting up to speed and running from meeting to meeting that by the time I realized I'd forgotten to pump, my breasts were engorged. With each passing minute, they became more swollen and painful. Milk started leaking through my blouse onto my suit jacket. To add insult to injury, the private room I had negotiated turned out to be a bathroom stall. Having no experience with engorged breasts, I tried to pump, but the machine suction couldn't latch on to what now appeared to be 2 throbbing bowling balls on my chest. To relieve myself, I applied warm paper towels and tried expressing the milk by hand. That worked, but it meant I couldn't hold the empty bottle, and the good Lord didn't exactly design women's breasts so they would be easy to aim. There I was, kneeling on the floor of a bathroom stall in my drenched silk blouse and designer suit, emptying my baby's milk into the toilet. Tears were streaming down my face as the milk streamed from my body. My breast had exploded, and my vision of a future in which I gracefully managed both career and home had been obliterated. On the suffocating train ride home from Wall Street to 125th Street in Harlem, the reality of my new circumstances began to sink in. If I was too consumed at the office to remember to do something as essential as pump milk for my baby, what else was going to fall through the cracks? When would I sort the pile of mail or pay the bills? How was I going to keep up with the laundry and cooking? When would I have time to go to the grocery store? My floors were going to turn into a health hazard as soon as my son started crawling. How would I keep them pristine? I had missed 2 emails from the caregiver while I was in meetings. How would I make sure her questions were answered promptly? What would I do about getting the car inspected? Would my book club ever see me again? Would I ever read another book? How would I buy all the Christmas gifts for family and friends? How would I have time for family and friends? How would I have time for me? All of a sudden, the idea of scaling the professional ladder, being strong and vibrant and making a difference in the world, all while nurturing a wonderful marriage and raising a healthy and happy child, went from inevitable to overwhelming. My sorority sisters used to call me Trapper Keeper because I was so well organized. But now when I looked at my situation, I felt trapped by competing demands. I wanted to be the perfect working mom, not a milk-soaked, stressed out mess. But there was no way I could organize my way out of this. Something would have to give. I knew that many women solved this dilemma by simply outsourcing their domestic responsibilities. There is a robust supply of professionals, mostly other women, who can be hired to do everything from cooking to cleaning to carpooling. But this is largely the solution for women who can afford an in-home staff. Women at senior levels who earn big salaries or are married to men who earn them. That wasn't my husband and me. We were making just enough money to cover our living expenses, childcare, retirement, and student loans, with occasional support to members of our extended family. How was all of this going to get done? The enormity of the challenge reduced me to tears. I was sniffling in bed at 10 p.m. when my husband got home. It was early for him as he regularly pulled all-nighters at the bank where he worked. I listened to him kick off his shoes and leave them in the hallway instead of putting them in the closet. I knew the exact moment he was hanging his jacket because I could hear the rustle of the dry cleaning bag that I had picked up for him on my way home. He headed straight to the fridge for the dinner he knew would be waiting there. After he'd eaten, I heard the familiar clatter of his plate and cutlery being placed in the kitchen sink instead of the dishwasher. Then a thud, his body hitting the blue couch. I had seen him in this position countless times. His right hand would be resting lazily on his thigh as he used his thumb to awaken the remote. As I heard the TV click with the usual drumbeat of ESPN highlights, a tinge of resentment tickled my toes. By the time it reached my knees, it had become jealousy, which turned to anger inside my stomach. By the time the anger crawled up my chest, it was full-blown rage. Clearly, he and I were on the same highway, but somehow he had managed to detour around the crash scene. I was his solution to having it all. What would be mine?
Thank you. Thank you. I loved hearing the laughter from the group. That's pretty much how I felt through every chapter of the book as I've read it. And I think no matter where you sit on your career journey, there's
or on the couch.
Or on the couch. There's so many elements of your story that resonate. And so many great lessons to be shared. So thank you again in advance. I'm so glad to be bringing you here to Google. I am going to now ask a few questions of Tiffany, but I want to, as I'm looking at all of you, remind you that this is really meant for all of us to have a conversation with Tiffany. So if you have any questions as I'm asking, please feel free to raise your hand. But I will be coming to you in a couple of minutes as well. So you can also start preparing your questions. Tiffany, you were named to Fast Company's League of Extraordinary Women. You've raised nearly $20 million toward the cause of women and girls. You've been featured in many news outlets, including New York Times, NPR, Essence, O Magazine, and now you have a book that's being released in 1 week with a foreword by Gloria Steinem and endorsements from Sheryl Sandberg, Anne-Marie Slaughter, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, Soledad O'Brien, and the list goes on. Please share with us a bit about your life's journey and what drew you to this work. How have you arrived to the point where you are today?
Well, I'll start with my parents, as we're, a lot of people start there. My mom found out she was pregnant with me when she was 19. My parents are from Watts. They're not that far away from here. And suffice it to say, in the mid-1970s, it was a rough place. It was a rough time. My mom didn't know anything other than Watts, but she knew that she wanted a different experience for her children. And so she happened to have an uncle who was an Army recruiter, and between the big foreboding uncle and my mom, they convinced my dad to join the Army. My dad, so I was born 9 months later at Fort Lewis Army Base in Tacoma, Washington, which is how I'm from, the Pacific Northwest. And, okay, well, shout out. I see that love, Pacific Northwest love right there. But my dad eventually went to college on the GI Bill. He eventually earned a PhD in theology. I grew up literally in a pretty house with a white picket fence around it. My parents obliterated a very vicious cycle of poverty and addiction and violence in one generation. And they did it off of this fundamental truth that if you want something that you've never had before, you're going to have to do something that you've never done before in order to get it, which is part of my theme and what I would love to do and what I'm trying to do around women in leadership. I always start there because I find it quite remarkable. And even as you were talking, I know you were reading about me, but I was thinking, it's just remarkable that a man who literally had to kick a heroin addiction in order to pass that physical exam for the military now has a daughter who's sitting here, and this woman is reading all of those accolades around her. And I am telling you, even though I know we're going to leave politics outside of this room, that to me is evidence that we live in the greatest country on earth. That to me is just evidence of that. I'm probably one of the most patriotic people, on the planet, and it's part of the reason why I think we need to fight for it. So, that's where I started. I feel like a lot of people ask about my purpose and how do you know that your purpose, is women and girls? That's my life's work. It's pretty much why I'm on the planet. I already know what my tombstone says. I'm just kind of project managing my life backwards at this point. And I feel like purpose doesn't have to be some big, daunting, existential experience where you're walking down the street and the skies open up and some voice of God says to you, you're here to save orca whales or whatever it might be. Right? I really believe that purpose is simply a commitment that's inspired by experience. And probably the biggest experience that inspired my commitment to women and girls was my relationship with my mother. So the same woman that I spoke about, who quite frankly is the reason why I am the empowered woman that I am today, really taught me that I should be the most powerful change agent in my own journey. And she did it simply by just telling me every day, Tiffany, you're so smart, and you're so beautiful, and you're so loved. And my world turned upside down when I was 16. My parents took me to summer camp, but my mom picked me up at the end of summer camp. And I write about this in the book because it was such a world turned upside down moment. And on the way home, she explained to me that my parents were getting a divorce. She didn't use the word divorce, but I knew what she was talking about. And when I got home, I ran to my little sister's room, who explained that yes, this was true, and that my dad had already moved out of the house. And over the course of a few years, what I learned was that all of the political, social, economic capital that I just assumed was our families, and of course at 16 I wouldn't have articulated it in that way, that only belonged to our dad. My mom had chosen to prioritize her family, and she didn't have access to those things after the divorce. In fact, she spun back into those vicious cycles of poverty and addiction and violence that I knew nothing about. So it was a very difficult time. And I tried to save my mom probably through my early 20s, but you can't do that. And I probably probably spend every day just trying to get to as many women as I can to help them understand that they're smart and that they're beautiful and they're loved, just to say thank you to my mom.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I met Tiffany about 8 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago, when you were at the White House Project,
Yes.
and that was at Time Warner. And we were introduced by Marie Wilson,
Yes.
who then launched and ran the White House Project. And I have to say that every interaction I've ever had with you, and it's developed into a friendship, but at every point, you've always been consistent in your mission, in what you stand for, and in the affirmation that you give other women to be who they can be. And it's absolutely beautiful, and it's manifested in this book that you're sharing with all of us. So thank you again. So some women talk about having it all, while others push back on that idea, saying it's not possible. Some talk about finding work-life balance, while others say it's not possible, or perhaps not even the best goal. Where do you come down on those issues?
Well, I think that it's possible to have it all, as long as you don't do it all, as long as you drop the ball. That's kind of the purpose of the book. I mean, I think the first thing is to get really clear with ourselves about what it means to you to have it all. Mm-hmm. So when someone asks me, do you have it all? Do you feel like you have it all? I start by I say, yes, I feel like I have it all. And then I explain what I mean by that, what I think having it all means. For me, having it all means that I have a really strong, healthy relationship with a partner. It means that on most days, I feel like I'm raising conscious global citizens, even though they may not be saying please or thank you in the moment. It means that I have a career that's very much driven by my passion and my purpose, and I feel like I'm earning a livelihood, but also making a difference in the world. For me, having it all means that I'm generally joyful and healthy and fit, and that I have a high quality of relationships with the people that I care about in my life. And it also means, for me especially, that I'm giving back to my community. I was taught that you're not here on the planet just for you, you're here for your local and global community, and that I'm able to give back. And I'm selfish, so I want all those things at the same time. People say you can't have all that at the same time. I'm like, well, I want it all at the same time. And so, I had to engineer a mechanism, a way to figure out how to have all of that. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of things that I don't do in order to. So, I think the most important thing is figuring out what matters most to you, which I talk about in the book a lot, and that's for everybody. And then figuring out what your highest and best use is in achieving what matters most to you, and using that as a filter to determine what you should be prioritizing.
Does that resonate with folks here? Yeah, I see some head shaking. The percentage of women in leadership roles is still low. Mm-hmm. And especially when we talk about women of color. So how do you envision jobs and companies evolving specifically for women?
I don't really envision companies evolving for women. I envision women evolving companies, is my short answer to that. I am obsessed with women in leadership, and people often ask too, because I really beat people over the head with it, and sometimes people would get very annoyed with me. But when I was growing up, my dad used to have this conspiracy theory about how there was this small group of elite people that ran the world. It was kind of like the man, we talk about the man, except they were plural, so it was like even more insidious, kind of like the alternate, universe of the Super Friends. And I would be really embarrassed when my friends would come over and my dad would warn us about these people. And I used to think my dad was crazy, like really crazy. Of course, as I grew in my own leadership, and I became the person sitting in boardrooms, it became more and more clear to me that my dad isn't so crazy. That, in fact, at the highest levels of leadership, there are individuals who are sitting around big wooden, marble, beautiful tables, maybe here at Google, they're glass. And they're making decisions that impact every single one of us. And to me, it doesn't matter so much whether you care about our economy or healthcare or the environment or education or technology. At the end of the day, there are human beings that are making the decisions around policy and around practices. Mm-hmm. And because so much work has been done on innovation and on what's required in order to innovate new solutions, and it's so obvious that diversity is important in order to make that happen, I just find it a complete travesty that we wouldn't strive to have more women and more people of color and more members of the LGBT community and more people with disabilities and more people with different socioeconomic backgrounds sitting around those tables. And, you know, I have a lot of friends, it's so funny that I'm saying this, who are white and male and straight and wealthy, and they're really smart and well-meaning, and I love you, Dan and Philip and all of you guys. They're amazing. It's just that our problems are so large and they're so complex now, and wouldn't you want help? You know, we've largely had that group of people, except for a few exceptions that we really herald and celebrate, leading at the top for so long. And I imagine that you all are tired, and that you'd want some help. So that's why I'm really focused on women in leadership and why I really think that diversity matters. And by the way, every once in a while someone will say, well, why isn't your life's work advancing Black people? Or why isn't your life's work advancing some other group? And I always have to remind people that women are half the population, if you haven't noticed. So if you care about advancing all women, then you kind of care about advancing Black people. If you care about advancing all women, then you care about advancing the LGBT community and people from different religious backgrounds, because we kind of make up all of that. I think that women are evolving the workplace in a couple of ways. One is that women's presence in the workplace causes workplace leaders to recognize this very amazing, simple fact, which is that the human race cannot continue were it not for someone taking care of very young people and someone taking care of very old people. And this relationship between your work and your life can no longer be a separation between church and state when women are in the workplace. And I think the beautiful part about that is that it opens up men's humanity to that part of themselves as well. I think it's also disruptive, and I think that women evolve the workplace because it really disrupts this idea of the workplace being a meritocracy. And I get this a lot. I work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, and I sit at those big wooden and marble tables with really, really smart men who are trying to figure out, how do we get more women into our senior ranks? And they're all sitting there, and I ask them a question usually. I start by asking, what are the qualities, what are the characteristics required in order to be successful at this company? Like, obviously you guys are here, you're in this room, you're obviously successful, right? Yeah, we're successful. And they always shout out very noble things. It's important to be hardworking. You've got to be smart. You know, you've got to be focused on your performance. You've got to be. And my next question is always, well, you know a lot of women who are in your ranks. Are they not smart? Are they not high performing? Are they not? And I was like, yeah, Sally is. Yeah, Jill is. And I say, but they're not sitting in this room where you're sitting. And they're like, no. So then I said, well, can I suggest that there might be something else going on? Any other kind of phenomenon or dynamic in the workplace outside of just exhibiting those characteristics that is leading to the fact that you're in this room and they're not. And by the way, I love doing the exercise with women because there are usually more women as a diverse group in a company than other groups. And so it becomes more obvious and apparent that maybe there's something else going on. And that's when I can start to have a conversation about the politics of an environment, about how we define what hardworking is, right? And how we can disrupt our assumptions and our stereotypes about what it means to be successful. So that's why I think it's important for women to be there, and why I think we're evolving the workplace, and why I think it matters.
Shifting those behaviors and those practices. Well, let's, and this, I could go on with this conversation, but I want to talk a little bit about the book.
You could especially.
Yes. You speak about the ability to let it go.
Yes.
So talk to us about why letting it go and that impact on our careers.
Yes. So here's the thing, and this applies, by the way, I'm on the first leg of my book tour, and every event that I've done, I've had a man at the end come up to me and whisper, oh, this applies to us too. And I'm like, I know, but. So, you know, here's the thing. Most of us are operating as if we are our own change agents. We think of ourselves as very modern, as very empowered. We're making these decisions that are very important for ourselves. But the truth is that, and this is what I really had to come to in my own drop the ball journey, is that we all essentially are playing different roles in our lives. If you're a woman, your first role is probably daughter. that you're conscious of or that you're aware of. You are a student, you may be a sister, you may be a citizen, you may be a worker, you may eventually become a wife, a mother. And what's interesting is that women, by default, put the word good in front of all of their roles. So we can't just be a daughter. We strive to be a good daughter. We can't just be a student. We have to be a good student. We have to be a good sister, right? And all of those roles have these job responsibilities associated with them that you didn't make up, because we all have them. Like if you're a good sister, you have to respond to your sister's text message within 10 minutes. Otherwise, you're a bad sister, right? We all know this. If you're a good mom, you have to be there when your child takes their first steps. If you're not there, then you're a bad mom. And when I go through the process, when I went through it myself, and I really encourage people to go through the process of asking yourself 2 questions, which is, number 1, take any one of those roles and ask yourself, what does a good X do? Right? What does a good worker do? What does a good brother do? What does a good father do? The second question being, how do you know that that's what a good X does? And what happens is that you realize that your perceptions about who it is that you are and how you're moving about the world, they don't actually originate with you. No one ever says, well, I think that being a good wife means that you cook dinner because I decided that. No, you got that from the women who maybe you grew up with, you got that from popular culture. I got a lot from popular culture. When I was growing up, I used to watch The Cosby Show. And there's the woman on The Cosby Show, her name is Claire Huxtable. You're shaking your head. Did you grow up on Claire Huxtable?
I have the entire box set.
Yeah, she has the entire box set, people. I was gonna be Claire Huxtable, She had perfect hair. She had flawless makeup. Her outfits were always amazing. She would waltz in flowing. You know how everything used to flow? She would waltz in and her hair would just be moving. She had 5 perfectly well-behaved children that all ranged in these crazy ages, right? It was like one was almost in college and the other one was like 5.
Yeah.
Her house was always clean. And in the second season, she made partner at a law firm. Do you know it wasn't until many, many years later, as a professional woman, when I was a hot mess trying to figure out how I was going to do all of this, that I was like, Claire Huxtable, she pulled one on me, right? There is no way. There's no way. And when you begin to go through that process, it becomes very clear and apparent that the most important ball that we need to drop are these unrealistic expectations about fulfilling all of these responsibilities and all of these roles. And by the way, even though for the most part in this book, I'm largely focused on this unrealistic expectation that women have around doing it all, the biggest ball that, in my experience, I would love for men to drop is this unrealistic expectation that you are to strive to be breadwinners at all costs. At all costs. Even the cost of spending time with your family, even the cost of supporting the women in your lives. And in some ways, it's a more insidious ball because you don't get as much permission for dropping it as women obviously do when we drop ours. But that to me is the biggest ball. There are all little micro balls that I've dropped, like cleaning the top of the refrigerator and checking my mail and scheduling my kids' social calendar. That's all in the book too. But that's the big stuff.
You talk about your to-do lists,
Yes.
Which I think are legendary. What's on your to-do list now?
Well, the biggest thing on my to-do list now is engaging my kids in meaningful conversations every day. So one of the things I talk about in the book when I speak about what matters most and getting clear about your highest and best use is applying this drop the ball question, which I think is a really important filter. It's basically, just fill in the blank, whatever's on your to-do list, is that my highest and best use in achieving what matters most to me? And once I got clear that one of the things that mattered most to me was raising conscious global citizens, it became so much easier to use that as a filter for my to-do list. Is scheduling the kids' dentist appointments my highest and best use to raise conscious global citizens? No, actually, it's not. Doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done, and we talk about in the book, how do we actually get that done? But then it becomes clear that I need to be focused on what my highest and best use is, which for me is a combination of what we do really well with very little effort. And it doesn't have to be because we're a prodigy. It could just be that we've done it a lot. combined with what is it that only we can do. That's our highest and best use. So in relationship to my kids, one of the things that I do very well with very little effort is coach others, helping them to achieve clarity through guidance and encouragement. I can't help myself.
Yes.
Right? One of the things that only I can do is instill values in my kids. It's very hard to outsource the installation of values into kids, all right? And because I'm their parent, I feel that's very important. So my highest and best use in raising conscious global citizens is engaging them in those meaningful conversations every single day. I want to know, what kind of day did you create for yourself today? What are the choices that you make today, right? Who are the friends that you hung out with? Why is it that you're upset with this teacher? Like, what's happening? Because at the end of the day, even if I didn't quite make the dentist appointment, or my daughter's upset with me right now because I didn't help her sell her Girl Scout cookies, and I made her sell her own Girl Scout cookies. Although I did say in an interview recently, I hope that one day she's on a panel as some mogul talking about how the fact that she had to sell her own Girl Scout cookies contributed to her leadership success. I know that I've done my part in being a responsible, good mom by fulfilling that role. So that's on my list every day.
You're redefining what that means for you.
That's it.
I was mentioning to Tiffany that last night I've started reading with my daughter in the evenings because we just didn't have quite enough time to both do reading and talking, and I realized if we both read, so we're both fulfilling our passion for reading, and we both talk about what we're reading afterwards, we'll start having those conversations where I can dig a little bit deeper into her comprehension and what she's thinking about. And last night, she was asking me about Drop the Ball, because I was reading Drop the Ball. She said, so Mama, what does that mean? So we had a really interesting conversation and comparing it to her love of basketball and her day-to-day. And it's making that intentional time that means so much to both of us. But I had to be really intentional about that and really think about, does it matter to me that she's reading by herself? Are we maximizing that time with each other while I'm catching up on email?
Right.
Versus I can catch up on email later. This is the time with her. So thank you for serving as a wonderful reminder for that. Okay, I'd like to take a look at the audience and see if there are any questions.
Thank you for sharing. It sounds like an excellent concept. I'm curious how you approach the instances where you can't easily prioritize your options. Like say the very kind of stereotypical choice between a child's event that it's very important to them that you attend, and a very important presentation at work where it's something that is kind of critical to perhaps multiple important life goals, and you can't do both at the same time. How do you approach making that choice?
It's really tough. I think one is, in a situation like that, you're not just competing with your own priorities, but the priorities of other people who are in your lives. And the reason why it's largely memoir, and I couldn't write about everything, so I focused on my relationship with my husband in the book as somebody who I needed to engage, is that it's lovely, as I've discovered, to get really clear about what matters most to you and what your highest and best use is. But if they're used to you making buttermilk biscuits every Saturday and every Sunday, and you decide that's not your highest and best use, you're going to run into trouble. So, one of the things is, particularly when other people are involved in this, is to meaningfully engage them in your process. And I literally had to learn to speak differently and to frame what it is that I was trying to do differently. So for example, I used to be filled with an enormous amount of resentment for whether it was my husband or other people in my life who seemingly could not manage to do all the things that I was able to do. And I spent a lot of time in the book in that part of my life, because it's real and people feel it, and it's very difficult to be generous in that place and in that state. One of the things that I discovered is that largely the people in your life do care about you. I mean, that's part of the reason why they're there. And if you can put your ask, your request, your priority in a context that matters to them, which is essentially your well-being and your happiness, very rarely does the person say, no, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to do that. And if they are, you might want to think about reevaluating that relationship. So literally, instead of saying, I can't believe you didn't take out the recycling again, when are you going to take out the recycling, right? I would say, And I know it sounds silly, but I took a page from Dr. Phil's column. I'm obsessed with O Magazine and Dr. Phil. By the way, if you ever have a problem, I think Dr. Phil needs questions because he's answered 4 of mine in the magazine. I say, hey, babe, I have been doing all of this kind of cheesy work around getting clear about what matters most to me. And I've come to a place where I'm really clear that what matters most to me is having a really healthy relationship with you, advancing women and girls, and raising conscious global citizens. And I've taken a look at all of the things that are on my to-do list on a daily basis. And I feel like so much of this isn't really laddering up to what matters most. You have always been my biggest champion, and you've always been here for me. And I was just wondering if there were a few things that you could take on that would help me to really achieve my passion and my purpose and make a difference in the world. And I know this seems like an overloaded, overblown conversation for the 2 things that I'm about to ask you for, which is taking out the recycling and checking the mail. I know it seems like I could have just sent you an email about that, but I've been doing so much reflection that I'm telling you this is really important to me. And if you could do that, it would actually mean the world. It would mean the world. What's the response going to be? Of course, sure, babe. And then, as you read about in the book, the next day, they're going to take the mail out of the mailbox. They're going to put it on the counter. They're not going to open one envelope. And then the next day, they're going to do the same thing. And the mail's going to pile up. And you can tell how this is going to go. This is why it's called drop the ball and not how to get other people to pick up the ball. But meaningfully engaging people is really important. Mm-hmm. The most important piece is you getting clear, even when things still need to happen, you getting clear about not attaching your value to the performance of the work. And it sounds silly when we intellectualize it, but we actually do it. For example, for a long time, I felt genuinely that I was a bad mom if my kids' hair was a mess, especially my daughter's. It was like, no, she's gonna be walking down the street and people are gonna be like, who is that child's mama? And why did they let her out of the house like that, right? It never, ever would occur to my husband that he was a bad father because his son needed a haircut, right? So it was divorcing. The biggest ball wasn't actually dropping the ball on the hair. It was dropping the ball on this idea, this obsession with the fact that if it wasn't done properly, then that meant that there was something wrong with me, that I had committed some moral transgression, which is essentially what guilt is, right? That's the biggest piece.
The brave, it struck me as so brave to be as rawfully honest as you were in the book, because you speak about these stories that we build in our head, mm-hmm. and the resentment that gets built around, well, he's not going to do it, so I'll do it for him, and why is he sitting in that blue damn couch when he can be helping me do the dishes, and how none of that helps serve your purpose, and none of that really gets you to the conversation you just shared with your husband, to really get to that raw and honest moment with each other about, hey, just doing these 2 things can help me fulfill my life's mission. And isn't that all you want for me? But we don't have those conversations because we're still stuck in our head about all the million things, and we just sort of like to live in martyrdom about it.
Exactly. Well, it's really funny because, and we're going to get to your question, is that, what I discovered in the process of writing this is we're always so worried about what other people think about us. But if you really think about it, if everybody's worried about what everybody's thinking about them, nobody's thinking about you. Right? Everybody's thinking about somebody else. But I want to speak to that because the reason why I wrote the book was because I do a lot of public speaking. And in 2013 in particular, I was doing a lot. I was on the launch team for Lean In. And I kept having this experience where I would get on a stage and I would speak largely about the collective solutions to women's problems, particularly leadership problems. So I would talk about the importance of equal pay for equal work, how we needed affordable childcare, how we needed workplace flexibility, all of these things that I've been a staunch advocate of and have been in the trenches with all of these women, who were on the book around. But I had this experience where every time I would speak for 45 minutes to an hour on all of these issues, and I would then stop and open it up for Q&A, the first set of questions I got were, to me, personal questions that had nothing to do with what I just spoke about. And, you know, a woman might be in the audience and she would raise her hand and she would say, yeah, Tiffany. So my question is, during your talk, you said something about your daughter who's 7, and then you said something about your son who's 10, and you mentioned your husband who's in Dubai. You're in San Francisco with us right now, but you live in New York, and tomorrow you're going to be in Baltimore. And I like your outfit. You seem kind of healthy and joyful and happy and fit, and you have this career that's all about like advancing your purpose and passion for women and girls. And I was just wondering, how are you doing all of this? And all of the other women in the audience would be like, I was kind of wondering that too. And I had come up with one line to distract people from this question, which I thought was a personal question that was so frivolous and had nothing to do with what I was talking about. I would just say, I just expect way more from my husband and far less for myself than the average woman. And people would laugh like that. And then I would kind of move people on to what I felt were more substantive issues around public policy and corporate practices. And one day, I had what I call a Tiffany's epiphany. I stepped back from the podium, and I did have that existential voice. And it said to me, Tiffany, this is not about you. They're not asking you that question because they want to get all up in your personal business. They're asking you, how do you manage it all? Because these women are trying to figure out, how can I manage it all? And if your life's work is advancing women and girls, you owe them a better answer than that one-liner that you came up with to get some laughs. Marie Wilson, who we both know, who's just a pioneer, she is my political mother. And one of the things that she always used to say to me is, Tiffany, if you want to create real change in the world, you're going to have to meet people where they are. You can't expect people to come to where you are. And have you ever had an experience where someone wise has told you something over and over, and you're like, yeah, like you get it, but then later on you have a moment where you actually get what they were talking about? That was my moment where all of a sudden it hit me that I was doing it. Yeah. I was showing up on these stages, and I was imposing my own ambition for all of these women and encouraging and inspiring them to want to be CEOs and senators and to launch their own businesses. And they were saying, okay, we get that, but right now we're just trying to figure out, how do we get everybody out of the house at the right time with the right backpack? And I really had to take a pause, and I really had to be honest about the fact that, you know, that Tiffany that everyone saw on the stage that they were describing, that was the new and improved Tiffany. That wasn't the journey. And it was certainly a difficult story to tell because I had to reveal like my biggest feminist dirty secret, which was that for many years in my career, publicly, I advocated for women's non-traditional roles in the workplace. But at home, I was on Stepford Wife autopilot, never questioning what was happening in my own home. If you had done an analysis of the division of labor in my home in 1997, yes, I've been married for 20 years, it would have been exactly the same as a couple in 1957. But I thought of myself as very modern and progressive and all of that. So I felt like I owed it to women to be that honest and to be that truthful. But the other secret is that the book, even though it's a memoir, isn't really about me. And many women who have read it so far get to the very end and all of a sudden realize, you're talking about me. Like, yeah. Because there's really nothing. There are specifics like my school and my husband's name and my kids' names. But honestly, there aren't very many stories that I don't hear all the time from women and from men in their lives. So that was a long-winded response to what you inspired me.
It was beautiful and several questions into it.
She's got her question. She's been so patient.
Hi. Something that stood out to me was when we were talking about expectations that women have of themselves for, you know, being a good wife or sister, or and I think we also have a lot of expectations in the workplace that can lead to stuff like imposter syndrome. And I was wondering if that's something you ever dealt with.
Absolutely, right? And the thing that's remarkable and why I have so much empathy for everyone is that, remember what I said about my upbringing. I had a mother who told me every day, Tiffany, you're so smart and you're so loved and you're so beautiful. So when I The person who heard that every day is sitting in a literary theory class thinking, oh my God, this dude from Yale, he's obviously way more prepared than me and much smarter than me, and how did I even get into this program? Then you know we're in trouble, right? Because not everybody had someone who was whispering those sweet nothings into their ear. So absolutely, I deal with it and I've managed it. And to be honest, women like Daisy have been my solution. Because I think that the more and more that you surround yourself with people who can affirm you in the way that you need to be affirmed is really important. I also have started talking to myself more, which drives my kids crazy. But, you know, we all have these voices in our heads. And I've just called mine as Cynthia. And she's always like really like mean to me. And, you know, she'll say things like the alarm will will go off and I'll hit the snooze button and she'll be like, again, you're not going to get up and go to the gym again. And it's just like, F you, Cynthia. Like, I'm on a book tour. I've been working really hard and I don't deserve this, right? Talking back. But really, it's the investment of other people that has helped me the most. I am just the cumulative investment of a lot of people, mostly women. I support and help women who have negative experiences with women in the workplace, but I have to tell you, I have been sponsored, mentored, coached by woman to woman to woman. Literally, I've been sent to each one. And Janie Williams, when I was in Seattle, was my first sponsor. I didn't even know what that was, but she basically introduced me to all the philanthropists in the city and kind of endorsed me. When I moved to Boston.
Can you explain what a sponsor is for those who may not be familiar?
So a sponsor is, thank you, Daisy. A sponsor is someone in your ecosystem whose primary value is in what they say to other people about you when you're not in the room. Okay. Sponsors are people, especially in the workplace, that are vitally important because people are always talking about other people in meetings. And it's really important to know when those meetings are happening, when your name might come up, and to already have someone in place who's able to say, John is an absolute rock star. We definitely want to make sure that John is moving forward. That's really what a sponsor is, as opposed to a mentor whose primary responsibility and value is in what they say to you when you're in the room with them, right? Does that help?
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Janie Williams was my first sponsor, and when I moved to Seattle, she said, when I moved to Boston, she said, when you get to Boston, go find Lois Lindauer and you tell her that I sent you. And when I was in Boston, Lois Lindauer got me my first job at Simmons College. When I was moving to New York, someone else in my network, her name was Larissa Seller, she said, when you get to New York, go find Marie Wilson at the White House Project, you tell her I sent you. And I did that. And I'm at Levo. I work for a company that's a platform for millennial professionals to help them elevate their careers. Gina Bianchini, Sheryl Sandberg, Fran Hauser. Go check out Levo. Tell them that we sent you. Mm-hmm. That's how I've moved forward, but it's also how I've navigated my journey. My youngest sister, I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and my youngest sister says, I'm so boring. She says, you never want to learn a lesson yourself. Because I'm very happy to sit at the feet of people who have already been there, done that, and just learned from them. But they've played a very critical role in helping me to recognize my value, and for me to get over those gremlins around insecurity. Because why would all of these incredible people invest in something unless they were going to get a return on the investment, which I think they are now.
Absolutely.
How do I help my wife to drop the ball?
So this is a obvious answer. So here's the thing about dropping the ball. She's got to drop it first, right? You can give her permission to drop it, but I actually think guys are really good at that. Tend to be really good at that, really good at saying, why are you like killing yourself over this? Or why are you very good? And so I give her the book, When my husband read this manuscript for the first time, his first response was, oh, is this what's been happening for 20 years? And it's actually every man that's read it said, men need to read this book because it explains all of these dynamics and experiences that you have that seem very mystical that you don't even bother to ask about. So for example, I talk about this dynamic in the book that I call HCD. It's called home control disease. It's basically when you think that everything at home should be done a certain way. In my case, it was my way. And it manifests in all of these tiny little micro obsessions that men just kind of tend to roll with. So, for example, I really love cooking, and I used to cook all the time. And because I like fresh food, there would always be leftovers in the refrigerator. And let's say on Monday I made meatloaf, and Tuesday I made fajitas, and Wednesday I made fried chicken. On Thursday, if I had a work event and my husband ate some leftovers, when I came home, I would have expected him to eat the meatloaf first, because I had a running expiration date in my head for all the leftovers that were in the refrigerator. Right? And if I came home and looked in the fridge and he'd eaten the fried chicken, I would say, "Why'd you eat the fried chicken and not the meatloaf?" And he would say, "I really like your fried chicken." And I would say, "So you don't like my meatloaf?" And he would know what to say. All of those things that you all experience on the other side that in that situation made perfect sense to me are unveiled and revealed, in Drop the Ball in terms of what's actually happening in terms of our psychology. So, I encourage you to remind her that she's smart and that she's beautiful and that she's loved. And just keep doing what you're doing. And if she does get to a point where she decides, you know what, I could actually do this, just be there so she doesn't drive herself completely crazy, and give her lots of permission. Every once in a while, my husband will say, "Oh, I miss vintage Tiffany." I miss vintage Tiffany. And I'm like, I know, but this is better for the world. And he's like, "I agree."
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I think we have time for one more question.
You said that you think of your work as advancing women in leadership, and you don't specifically hone in on Black women or Hispanic women. But I think the data shows pretty clearly that there's a difference in the experience of women across those races. And I'm just curious as how you think about that when you're thinking about women in leadership.
Mm-hmm. So I want to be really clear that when I was responding to the other question or when I was commenting, what I meant was that I care deeply about all women. And I said that, in the women's community, often when you refer to women, people assume you mean white women. They mean that you mean white, straight women. So I always have to make it a point that when I'm talking about women, I'm talking about all women, which is why I was making that that very clear. I mean, there's no doubt that multiple identities complicate how we feel about the environments that we're in, and it complicates how people perceive when they look at us, when they interact with us, what it means to be successful. As you probably very well know, if you're a woman of color, you have to adjust in all kinds of ways. You have to smile more, right? Because people will think you're an angry Black woman. I'm very friendly. And I've had to adjust and I've had to do all that. I feel like it's really important to provide opportunities for anyone in any community. I believe this is true for schools. I believe it's true for workplaces, for there to be safe spaces where people can collectively exchange stories and share the dynamics and exchange principles with one another for being successful. I also think it's important for organizations to really think about their policies and their practices, but more importantly, their culture and how it manifests for different people. And that's why, a lot of my friends and a lot of the people that I work with are doing the kind of work that Daisy's doing, because, not everyone is going to be an entrepreneur. There's a lot of people that are impacted in big Fortune 500 companies, and I feel like it's really important that there are places where everyone can bring their full selves to the table. I have a mentor who lives in Boulder, Colorado, and I was visiting her some time ago, and she has this pond in her backyard. And while she was getting ready, she asked me if I would feed the fish in her pond. And while I was doing it, I asked her out loud, "What kind of fish are these?" And she told me that they were goldfish. And I said, "What kind of goldfish?" Because the fish were huge. They were like at least, over a foot long. And she said, "Those are those little, 25-cent goldfish that you buy at the state fair." And I said, "Well, how is that possible? They're so big." And she said, "Well, the reason why those little 25-cent goldfish stay small is because when we get home, we put them in a fish bowl." She said, "But if you take those same goldfish and you put them in a pond, they'll grow to the size of their environment." How many of you knew this about goldfish? I didn't know this about goldfish. And it was another Tiffany's epiphany, because I thought, wow, I work with all of these companies, and basically they're either fish bowls or they're ponds. I very rarely find ones that are in between. Either they're places where women's and people of color, people with disabilities, people in the LGBT, where their ambitions and their inspiration and their potential grows, right, exponentially, or they're places where it's kind of enclosed in the fishbowl, and that's why the goldfish are jumping out in droves, which is usually why when I get the phone call, right? So I think it's critically important. I would imagine that a company like Google, who's making that kind of data public, is committed to doing something about it. I know her personally, and I know that she is personally committed to doing something about it. And I encourage you to become a champion as well, which I'm sure you already are.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. We're at time. I want to thank Tiffany for being here. I want to thank you for writing this book. It is not just well-researched, it's not just really human and funny, but it's inspiring and it's really practical. I'm actually, to the gentleman who asked the question, I'm telling my husband I'm almost done with it. I was like, when I'm done, you're going to read this as well. And we're going to go through this experience together. The fact that you made meatballs and fried chicken and fajitas just like in 1 week is beyond me. I was like, my husband does the cooking at home, and he doesn't make all that, and it's fine by him, and it's fine by us because we're well fed. Thank you so much. Women's leadership is more important than ever, and I am so proud to know you. So proud to have shared you with our Google community, and I celebrate you, and am excited to see all the good that this book is going to do in this world.
Thank you so much.